Everyone, good afternoon. It is so good to see all of you are here with us today. And thank you for joining me today live from the table. For those that do not know, I am your Detroit City Council President, Brenda Jones. And we're here giving you an update on yesterday's Detroit City Council formal session. We are also, as Ms. Wesley just indicated, live on Facebook at www.facebook.com/CP Brenda Jones. Listeners and viewers on Facebook will be able to ask questions at the end of our discussion. Yesterday, George Floyd was laid to rest. But to honor his memory and prove that he did not die in vain, we cannot rest. As we do peaceful protests in the street, we must also protest in the policy. The most important actions to be taken now are the ones by those who are in position to change laws, processes, and policies. Today, we have a panel of superb lawmakers and superb law enforcement to address steps that currently are being taken and to discuss future steps that need to occur to combat racial injustice and police brutality. I am joined by Senator Marshall Bullock and Senator Sylvia Santana, co-sponsors of Senate Bill 945. Michigan State Police Director, Colonel Joe Gasper, Detroit Police Assistant Chief, James White, Detroit Board of Police Commissioners Chair, Lisa Carter, Chief Robert Dunlap from the Wayne County Sheriff Department, Darnell Blackburn from the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, better known as MCOLES. That's MCOLES. And last but not least, Anthony Lewis from the Michigan Civil Rights Department. What a panel. We probably need 5 hours for this panel. But yesterday, the Detroit City Council passed a resolution in support of enhanced police policies throughout the state of Michigan, throughout the city of Detroit, and across the nation in response to the nationwide protests against police brutality and institutionalized racism. Within that resolution was the support of Senate Bill 945 passed by the Michigan Senate last Friday, requiring mandatory bias training for police. Mr. Lewis, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. The implicit racial bias seems to be at the forefront of the racial injustice we're seeing with law enforcement. Take a shot and explain to us why you think this is what we're looking at.
Well, I think that, from an implicit bias standpoint, basically what we're looking at is a general definition of implicit bias is basically a tendency to kind of process information based on unbiased, unconscious associations or feelings. And that's like an overarching general definition. for implicit bias. And I think that, you know, and I applaud, you know, I definitely applaud. I say, well, first I want to thank you, President Jones, for having this forum and having such a discussion today, because it is much needed. And, you know, and I want to, you know, I do want to applaud both of our senators here for taking these steps and, you know, for taking these steps now, because I said, but I do want to say that in terms of training, I think training is necessary. I do want to caution that training, that simply training is not the panacea that that everyone wants it to be. But it is vitally important. Training is vitally important for MCOLES, for, you know, for our officers who are being trained to come into, you know, law enforcement, for those, and for our existing officers to be exposed to training like implicit bias, and building cultural competency in those, you know, and those types of trainings involved. So while it is a very important component, and I applaud our senators for putting forth that, because it is much needed, and I believe it's a long time in coming.
Thank you so much for that. And again, it's just truly an honor that you took time out of your busy day, and all of you, because I know your days are extremely busy these days, to join us on this so important discussion that we're having today. I want to go to now Senator Bullock and Senator Santana. Can you just describe the goal of Senate Bill 945 to address this issue with racial bias training? And I'm going to go to Senator Santana first, because they always say ladies first.
Well, thank you, Councilwoman Brenda Jones, for putting this platform together for us to discuss some very pertinent issues to our state and also across the nation. When you look at Senate Bill 945, I believe that the purpose of this legislation is to make sure that there is cultural competency when it comes to training through MCOLES for all of our law enforcement across the state. You know, in the past few years, you know, when you look at from 2015 to 2018, that's 4 years, 63 people have been shot and killed by law enforcement in the state of Michigan. And so I think that, you know, this is a time where this conversation needs to go beyond just a conversation. It needs to reflect in the policies that we provide here in the state of Michigan. And so supporting making sure that, you know, there is de-escalation training, making sure that although that is something that is currently a part of MCOLES training, where law enforcement will mirror the actions of an individual based on a de-escalation method, I think that there has to be further training and continual training in order to make sure that this is something that is moving forward through the times. You know, also I look at the fact that, you know, a lot of our law enforcement, unfortunately today, are having to deal with individuals who may have mental health issues when they're interacting with them. And so that's not something that a lot of our law enforcement they have some training around that area, but it's not something that in the past was pertinent to their job description. But now it's become something that really, when you look at the fact that we have closed a lot of our mental health facilities during the time of Engler's administration, it has become very prevalent that these are issues and supports that are needed to help make sure that law enforcement has the tools available to them. I just want to say also that, you know, training is something that needs to be continual, but definitely we need to make sure that we're funding these trainings properly and making sure that we are getting the best of the best when it comes to our law enforcement. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Bullock. Can't hear you. Please unmute.
I got unmuted
Okay,
again.
now we got you.
Okay, well, thank you for having this forum, and I couldn't have said it better than Senator Santana. Just so I have training from the state of Michigan. I started out years ago in Department of Juvenile Justice, and then took all of these academy trainings, and I've lived in several states. So it's necessary that there's therapeutic, what I call therapeutic intervention. So the cultural competency, the implicit bias, the chairperson, he called it something, but it's more like a preconceived, presumptive bias or profile that you already have in your head. So those things happen. So you automatically see someone of black and brown skin, you automatically have your presumptive preconceived notion of who or what they do or what they're about based on dress or whatever. And that stuff has to be taught, how to engage and how to train people with different techniques on how to de-escalate. I mean, law enforcement doesn't have a simple job. It's more to it than what we see. What we've seen has been like some really horrendous acts, and it puts a black eye on all of law enforcement, and I don't want that to happen. So I think there needs to be some mental health screenings. A lot of these young cats are coming back from the military, and so they have a different conditioning, and they come back to the community, and that has to be de-escalated or readjusted through some type of training. And that's what we want them to have: cultural competency training, de-escalation techniques, and it has to be continuous, ongoing. You just can't do it once and let them go. You have to continue to train that muscle memory, train that exercise. And there has to be some decency and humanity involved, and just good common sense and judgment in a lot of these instances, and they won't get escalated.
I appreciate that from both of you. Let me just also say, people have been talking about residency and requirements, and many people think that it's a crucial step towards strengthening the community policing. The senators, would you support state legislation to allow municipalities to reinstate residency requirements?
Go ahead, Sylvia.
And I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but let me say this to you all. One of the things that a lot of people say is that not just with that, it's also mentoring our young people, because if the young people see officers living in their community, it gives them an opportunity to say, I want to be like Chief Dunlap, or I want to be like whomever. It gives them that opportunity to say that with no law enforcement living in their community that's from the area that they can relate to. They don't have that mentorship. So what do you all think about that?
Well, I'll just say thank you for that question. I think that that residency requiring law enforcement to leave in the community was found unconstitutional. However, I definitely agree with you that having our law enforcement live in our community, be able to engage in a community in a different format is very prevalent to the relationship that they do have with the community. And so I think that, from DPD's standpoint, when you have your neighborhood police officers who are out in the community, engaging in the community events, I think that has been very beneficial to making sure that that relationship is better. To your response of repealing that, definitely that's a tall order of the day, but definitely maybe there's a different option. Perhaps even making sure that law enforcement are being recruited from within a community is a better option. Making sure that individuals who engage in a community have the opportunity to become a law enforcement officer, and providing that diversity that is needed to make sure that we do have a pool of individuals who live, work, and play right in our communities to be able to have those relationships strengthened.
So I would say the same thing, in that, even though it was, declared unconstitutional, growing up in Detroit, it had 7, 8, maybe 9 officers that lived on a 3-block span where I grew up. So it made the community safer. But with that said, it was changed during a Republican governor with a supermajority in the House and the Senate, and the political appetite to change that statewide may not be there right now. Now, if we get an opportunity to take the House, it may be a good discussion to start talking about while we have a Democratic governor. But then we'd have to have a conversation with each and every law enforcement department in the state to see where that could go. So it would be a tough do, although on a wish list, I wish we could go back to residency. It just changes the dynamic.
Nobody ever said it would be easy.
Yeah, it just changes the dynamic when you do have that. But for that, what I consider now is we just got to come up with incentives until that can happen to bring your residents from that city or people who are employed in that city to live in that city. And we got to do a better job of recruiting. And that goes with education. And, you know, it's all cross-pollinated with other things and other issues that we have. But we need to have officers go to the schools, talk to the students at an early age in the elementary school, and then revisit them in middle school and high school, and say that law enforcement is a great opportunity to take care of your family. We need to pay them better. We need to make sure, you know, so there are things like that. But we just got to incentivize it until we think we can make that happen.
And
It's funny because I asked that question and everybody put a smile on their face when I asked that question. Everybody had a different kind of look on their face when I asked that question. And I didn't mean to put anybody on the spot, but it has been a conversation. Go ahead, Senator.
And I'd just like to say, you know, kudos, Chief Dunlap. He's my constituent. So definitely there's still law enforcement who still remain residents of the city of Detroit. So that's not to put a black eye on anyone who's decided to move out of the city in this case, but I definitely want to make sure that I give him kudos because definitely he's still in the city of Detroit and lives, work, and plays here. And I think also, you know, culture eats policy every day. And so when we look at our law enforcement today, you know, I look at the 2nd Precinct, they've made strides to make sure that they're engaging with the community and the youth, bringing them up to the Capitol, showing them where policy decisions are being made. So there is a lot of engagement on the ground that has been very beneficial to the culture of law enforcement engaging with.
Thank you so much. And that's not just for Detroit, that's for every municipality. For every municipality, I think it would make a difference. I just, you know, hit on Detroit because that's just happened to be where I am in the city of Detroit, and the gorgeous, wonderful, awesome city of Detroit. So also, let me go to you, Mr. Blackburn, and he's from the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. And so I want to come to you for a minute as well. The resolution also supports your organization providing guidance to law enforcement agencies on continuing education, including diversity and implicit racial bias training, and urging law enforcement agencies to implement duties to intervene policies. Mr. Blackburn, can you briefly explain what your organization is currently doing for training and what steps are planned to fulfill the requirements of Senate Bill 945?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. To kind of just talk about it, first off, I got to kind of give you the backstory, quick backstory. With regards to in-service training, MCOLES sets the standards for all training in Michigan, but specifically, there is only one mandate for you to be trained once you become a police officer. And sadly, that's firearms training. That's the only mandate after. Now, we set standards for academy and, you know, post. But in that, you know, there's a lot of reasons. It's not just because the police departments want to do some harm or firearms damage or that type of thing. It's money and it's a lot of other things that go into place with this. As far as MCOLES is concerned now, we are excited about the opportunity to beef up. We do implicit bias training on a small level. It's in another part of the cultural competency curriculum, but we're excited about beefing it up and having this become an in-service training standard so that we can, so the agencies can be mandated to do the training. And, you know, now there's no excuse to do the training if it becomes a mandate. So we know it's going to be challenging for law enforcement. We do some of it on the skim level, but this gives us an opportunity to really dive in and make this another in-service mandatory training standard other than just firearms qualification. And I will say in firearms qualification, it's not just, you know, shooting. There is some decision making, but this is a lot more vital. So it's a great opportunity for us to beef the curriculum up and to get this out to law enforcement officers throughout the state.
Okay, thank you so much for that explanation. And so Additionally, the City Council resolution urges the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners to adopt the following policies, including the Campaign Zero #8 Can't Wait police policies, such as ban chokeholds and strangleholds, require officers to de-escalate situations before using force, require officers to give a verbal warning before shooting, require officers to exhaust all other reasonable alternatives before using deadly force, require officers to intervene to stop another officer from using excessive force, the duty to intervene, ban officers from shooting at moving vehicles, restrict high level of force to only the most extreme situations, require officers to report all uses of force, including threatening civilians with a firearm, require officers to be trained to identify and to recognize those who are deaf, hard of hearing. The Board of Police Commissioners' monthly review of body cam and police car recording as a form of accountability and oversight. We have Chairperson Carter joining us today. Can you just talk about how the Board of Police Commissioner addresses these recommendations?
So thank you, Madam President. Last week, the Board of Police Commissioners voted to review the use of force policies. So this week, our meeting will be tomorrow at 3 o'clock. You will see some change, some recommendations that will be made to the Chief's office that include those eight recommendations from the 808 hashtag. So the Board of Police Commissioners has been in the process. Last week, we actually had a presentation on use of force. And last week, we went into discipline. We had our presentation on discipline. But last week, like I said, we voted to review the use of force policies. We plan to tomorrow pass a resolution to implement some of those changes immediately. Some things we can change. I think that the department can change immediately, and some things we have to have more research into. And I know that Assistant Chief White is on the line, and he can tell you more. So we make the recommendation to the Chief's office. They take a review of everything, and then once they review it, it comes back to the board, and we review the final policies.
So before we hear from Chief White, let me ask you a question, Chair Carter.
Yes.
What are the policies that the Board of Police Commissioners are considering to monitor the body cams and the police car recordings, and how important is it to the duty to intervene?
I think it's very important. I know that the department does random monitoring of the webcams at all times. And sometimes we get random through our Office of the Chief Investigators when we get complaints. We also review the cameras filming. Sometimes we don't necessarily review it consistently, but the police department does.
Okay, okay. So thank you so much for that, Chair Carter. The resolution also supports the Justice in Policing Act, and that was introduced this past Monday by the Congressional Democrats. And this legislation seeks to establish national guidelines for the regulations of police conduct in response to national protests against police brutality against African Americans. The act includes, but is not limited to, the following national guidelines for police conduct: banning the police chokeholds, revised the federal criminal police misconduct statute to make it easier to prosecute officers who are involved in misconduct knowingly or with reckless disregard. Amend qualified immunity protections for police to enable individuals to recover damages when law enforcement officers violation of their constitutional rights. Provide greater oversight and transparency of police behavior. Grant subpoena powers to the Justice Department to conduct pattern and practice investigations of potential misconduct and help states conduct independent investigations. Create a national police misconduct registry database to try to prevent officers from transferring from one department to another with past misconduct undetected. So the next question, saying all of that, is for our state, our county, and our Detroit law enforcement representatives. And if you all can just tell us how are our current officers vetted prior to hiring in order to ensure that there's no prior record of racial bias in other law enforcement positions. AC White, I'm gonna start with you. I wonder why, but I'm gonna start with you, AC White.
Good afternoon, Honorable Counsel. With regards to the background investigation of each member, there is a background investigation conducted. We look at previous criminal history. We contact former employers or current employers to see exactly the type of employee the candidate is. There is a battery of background investigations that's done, which includes visiting neighbors to see the type of neighbor you are, the type of company you keep, the type of people you interact with. We also do a psychological evaluation, and one of the things that we look for in that psychological exam is to see if there's any cultural bias, anything that comes out of that. They look for that type of behavior. They look for anyone who has an issue with taking direction from people different than themselves, whether that be race or otherwise. We also look at any implicit bias that we can identify where for example, we look at things such as any conflict that one had at a previous employer multiple times and the person was of the same sex or the same race. And then we unpack that and we ask questions regarding that. So there is a very comprehensive background investigation done on every candidate. And then of course that standard is our own standard, but then there's an additional standard with MCOLES that each employee has to meet in order to be certified as a police officer in the state of Michigan.
Thank you, Chief White. And speaking of the state of Michigan, I had to go to Detroit first. Now I'm going to go to the state of Michigan. And thank you for being here with us. Colonel Gasper, can you just talk about how MSP vets for prior records?
Yes, thank you for having me, Madam President, and thank you for your leadership, particularly in this area. And if I may, just before I answer that question, I would like to say that, not only as a law enforcement officer, but as a human being, I was appalled at what we saw in Minneapolis and now in some of the additional excessive force incidents that we're seeing across the nation during the demonstrations. And I really hope to be able to partner with the governor and lieutenant governor, with your council, and particularly with the community to do our part to make this whole situation better at every level. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And very similar to the Detroit Police Department's background, ours is very similar to that. I think it's very important that we're doing as thorough background as we possibly can. And then I would just take one additional step there. And we have our own recruit school. And that recruit school lasts anywhere from about 24 to 28 weeks. And it's during that time that our background process continues. And that is a time for us to, again, further look at the strengths and weaknesses of potential future troopers to make sure that they can respond appropriately in any situation that we throw at them. And if we identify the areas of biases or like situations, then we can address those appropriately.
Okay, thank you so much. And that's good to know. It seems like it's being kind of consistent. So I'm gonna go over to Chief Dunlap. Can you talk about what you all are doing at Wayne County Sheriff Department? We can't hear you. We need you to unmute. Can't hear you.
Good afternoon, Madam President.
Good
Thanks
afternoon.
for having me. So the Wayne County Sheriff's Office, very similar to what the Colonel and Assistant Chief White just shared. We have the very same similar background process. But, you know, one of the things that I want to add, kind of as the Colonel talked about, you know, a lot of these individuals do a great job of presenting well during the screening process. And what we saw on television there with that individual was an example of how in many organizations, some of the worst and most evil type of human beings can slip through the cracks. And so I think it's beyond the recruiting process. We talked about training. I don't know what training is out there that can train a person on how not to be evil and hateful. You know, law enforcement requires, you know, compassion and a certain amount of empathy. And we saw none of that in almost those 9 minutes that we watched as the world watched that incident there. We talked about residency, and I want to thank my senator for acknowledging that, yes, I am still here, a diehard, and I don't hold it against anyone that has moved outside of the city. But I certainly think that there's something to be said about the relationship that is built with folks who live in the community. In fact, Sheriff Napoleon, my boss, still lives in the city after 44, almost 46 years in law enforcement now. And here in the Wayne County Sheriff's Office, it's like every inmate, every 2,400 inmate knows Benny Napoleon, and all their family know Benny Napoleon. And they know if they have a problem, we're gonna call Benny Napoleon, and Benny Napoleon is not going to tolerate the mistreatment of anyone, and he's not gonna tolerate that for anybody that works for him. We talked about the duty to intervene. Well, let me ask you this. What we saw was citizens on the sideline trying to intervene, and they felt helpless. They felt like they had handcuffs on for fear that they might be harmed or hurt if they got involved. I don't know what training an officer needs to understand that when a person is saying they can't breathe, they're not going to be able to survive a 9-minute chokehold. So while I agree with training, we can never get enough. I don't think this was a situation related to training. This was a situation that I think was clearly related to an individual that had no compassion, no empathy for people, and particularly the community where he worked. So as we look to change the laws around the country, I think what has to happen is the conversations that's going on right now. When I was a police commander and assistant chief there in the city of Detroit, you know, one of the things that I liked back in the 70s when Mayor Young, you know, impaneled that council that President Carter oversees. That was the model for what we're seeing in the 21st century policing, police and community with an oversight board made up of community members. Well, we took that a step further. As a police commander, I invited the people in my precinct to meet with me and staff on a regular basis every Monday so that the community can help us, figure out how to best police their community, identify the problems, and work together and fight crime. And through that, we built some relationships that I still have today. Many of the officers there still have. And I think that's what's missing in law enforcement. So when we look at residency and whether or not to bring it back, maybe there's a way to incentivize folks to move in the city where they live. We saw with Dan Gilbert incentivize people to move in where he gave bonuses for them to, lease apartments, And so I don't know what it looks like for the local law enforcement agencies, but I definitely think that it's a conversation that needs to be had, because when we build relationships, as my dad taught me as a young man, when they dehumanize you, they can do anything to you. But it's hard to dehumanize someone that you build a relationship with, that you trust and respect.
Thank you so much for that. Chief Dunlap, if I didn't know any better, I would have thought you was Pastor Dunlap as you was going through that. That was awesome, and I do agree with you. How can you teach a person, and sometimes I just say straight up common sense, because some of it is common sense. So thank you for that. Let me say that currently the other demands to address racial bias in police agencies questions the effectiveness of education, enhanced training, and other policies. Some of these demands, such as restoration of residency requirements, duty to intervene, and increased penalties for officers found in violation of racial bias policies, have already been addressed. The most discussed topic currently is defunding police agencies across the nation. The next question to the entire panel, and so please raise your hand if you'd like to answer. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, is what are your thoughts on the defunding and the demilitarization of police agencies, and how would this impact public safety? All right, I see your hand. Go ahead, Mr. Blackburn.
I think, I was looking at the panel, and 5 of us are on this panel out of the 8 or so were previous or current police officers. And I think, we can all acknowledge that there's a serious flaws in policing. I did a lot of research because defunding is such a huge word, and I would say refundal or refund. Maybe people want their money back for policing, but I think, even in defunding, I try to wrap my mind around it, and all from what I saw, I looked at it, and really it looks like more of a reallocation. It's like disbanding of police departments and then reforming these police agencies. One thing that I can truly say from seeing an oversight with all 600 agencies in the state is that Michigan does a very good job with law enforcement agencies in terms of policing. That's why we didn't, and kudos to Detroit, that's why you didn't see, kudos to MSP, the type of incidents across the country that happened, they didn't happen in Detroit like that. In this area, because of the relationships and the rapport. Now, with regard to reform, there's a number of things that we can do to reform policing. And I think, that is more of the solution is how you change the mindset. And there's some things that need to be done. I'll give you another example. Most police agencies, everybody on this call definitely does psychological evaluations for policing. They have a psychologist evaluate their employees prior to hiring them. They go through an extensive process. In the state of Michigan, truly, a medical doctor can check a form that says a person is free from mental and emotional instability. A medical doctor can check off this form and they can put something like, at this time, yes. Now, again, all the agencies on this call, they are squared away. They do not allow that to happen. They go through extensive psychological evaluations. And sometimes people, as Chief Dunlap said, they slip through the cracks. But even having something like that be a mandate for every department, not an option where a medical doctor can sign off, well, it may be something that is a benefit for agencies throughout the state. And we can work on the idea of reforming instead of defunding and kind of create better systems.
That was Darnell Blackburn, the first person to answer from the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. I see Mr. Lewis' hand, and then I'll come back to you, Senator Bullock. Mr. Lewis.
Yes, excuse me. One of the things in terms of, there's a wide chasm in terms of for the term defunding the police, and I think that really there needs to be a common understanding of really what that is, because really what you're trying to do, because really what we're trying to do with all these is affect culture. Because Senator Santana talked about culture, how important culture is, because, with all these changes in culture, see, you can't legislate culture, but you can pass legislation that affects culture. You can have policy, you can't policy yourself into a culture, but you can enforce the policies to have the culture that you want to have within your organization. And I think that, if we spend, and I think that when talking about defunding, you're probably looking at allocation. How are you allocating the funding that you have? Because I would say that, as I said earlier, training is not the panacea that everyone wants to make it out to be, because all of the officers in Minneapolis went through de-escalation training. They went through implicit bias training. But I think if you take it collectively, especially with at the MCOLES level and officers coming in, because they're going to be bringing in a culture, they're going to be bringing with them now a culture into the police agent, into these law enforcement agencies. So I think then you will begin to affect the culture in a long-term way. It's no different than teachers, because now teachers, in order to get your degree in teaching, you have to have some kind of a culturally competent teaching class prior to going there. And I think the same way in terms of law enforcement, I think the same thing needs to happen in law enforcement.
Thank you. And I'm going to move over to our senator, and then I'll come back to you, Assistant Chief White. Senator Bullock.
Well, I was going to piggyback on Brother Blackburn, but I'm pro public safety, right? And so when they say defund the police, and I know most people aren't talking about dismantling the police, but to defund an agency who's always asking for more money, I don't think I should have to choose. And as a legislator, I would like to fund both education, social services, and still fund my public safety. So I don't take the option of defunding to move and redistribute funds somewhere else. Now, you can unpack policing and figure out how to allocate within the public safety agency. So those are different things to do. But defunding, I want my police officers to actually make more money than what they make. I want them to have better livable wages, better benefits, get their pension back. I'm not defunding that. I don't even understand that concept. But I don't want to, that shouldn't take away from me advocating and funding those other components that we need more money for.
I second that motion. Assistant Chief White.
Well, you got to remember to unmute these things.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. And just like everyone here has said, I think the conversation around defunding is more about reallocation, because certainly, we still have a very important job to do, and our citizens deserve our very best. But there are a couple components I'd like to see that could aid us in doing this. Number one, the attitude in policing. It is not a right to be a police officer. It is an absolute privilege to wear this uniform, to wear this badge, and to serve this community. I would like to see the day where police officers are not just licensed from MCOLES, but like an ethics board, where much like doctors and attorneys, when there is behavioral issues that come up, they have to go before the board and speak to their license and opportunity to maintain that license. And maybe that's something like a board of police commissioners at a larger level. to maintain their license and for ethical violations and certainly for anything that shows racial insensitivity. The other thing that I'd like to see is when you look at a city like Detroit and the volume of crime and violence that the officers see, I would love to see funding allocated for psychological services, where after so many hours of working the street, there's a sabbatical of sorts where officers get to do some mental fitness work. They get to come in and decompress, and they need to talk to a professional in mental health to talk about some of the post-traumatic things that they're seeing, because it is not healthy to see that volume of violence and that volume of instances where people are at their worst. It will cause you to start to take on a perception that all people are always at their worst. And that is simply not the case. Overwhelmingly, our community of 700,000 plus are great law-abiding citizens. But when you're called out day in and day out to a small segment of society, you can be misaligned mentally to think that that's representative of a larger group than it really is. So I think that is repaired with mental fitness training and really looking at the hours of service that an officer gives and maybe pulling them back at a certain period of time. And then quite frankly, like we were many years ago when violence in the workforce was becoming apparent, the old days of, and I say this, the terms where people were going postal, and I don't mean to be insensitive with that, but that was a term born in the 80s when people were doing things. So we built these systems where there was a zero tolerance in workplaces for violence or threats of violence. Well, and we still have that policy today. Well, we should have a zero tolerance for any discriminatory practices. And those zero tolerances have to be demonstrated by it's immediately the end of your career. You get to do something else for a living and not be a police officer if you engage in discriminatory practices. So that's how I would like to see the reallocation of funding, but not the defunding of policing.
Thank you so much for that, Assistant Chief White. And then also, let me again commend you all for the job well done during all of these protests and everything. I think you all really stepped up to the plate and did an awesome job. I see you, Chair Carter, but let me go to Chief Dunlap because he also had his hand up. Wayne County Sheriff Chief Dunlap.
Yeah, so just briefly, you know, when I hear defund the police, it does bother me because certainly I hear people say that, you know, it doesn't mean what it sounds like. But, you know, when you look around, even during these protests, you had a lot of peaceful protesters, and those protests was compromised by agitators and even those walking around with AR-15s, okay? Bunch of people in the crowd with guns. And so you defund the police, you know, what does our communities, what do our society look like? You know, where does the responsibility fall for enforcing the law and keeping the community safe if you defund the police? And so I don't think the funding is the answer. I think the answer is just what we're doing here in Detroit and Wayne County in the state of Michigan is hold the police accountable. You know, with, as Assistant Chief White said, you know, we have a police commission, which is a civilian oversight board. We have the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. I think, you know, the things that we have in place here in Michigan is working. You know, I don't think there's a perfect answer to every situation. There's going to be some situations like the evil that we saw in Minnesota that we're going to have to deal with maybe at some other point in our life. But I don't think we should look at that one incident to say, hey, we need to do a 360 change on law enforcement, because we all know that the great majority of the men and women that work in law enforcement are some of the finest people in all of America. But it's situations like that that seem to get the most attention. There's great deeds being done every day by men and women in every one of these agencies that the news simply don't have time to report. I am very grateful that what we saw was captured, because absent that video, you know, those types of individuals can further not only infiltrate law enforcement, but other segments of our society. So I think the answer is to continue to hold law enforcement accountable at every level and not defund or do a 360, if you will.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move to our chair. Let me just also add that Assistant Chief White talked about some type of psychological something for the officers. And let me just say, not only for the officers, can you imagine the family at home of the officers and the things that are going on through their heads as they sit at home waiting on their husband or their wife to come back home from when they leave? I think sometimes nobody ever thinks about what the family is going through, what the wife is going through when she knows that her husband, or either he knows that his wife is out there during all of these situations like this. And they might also need to look at some type of psychological something for the family as well. Not that they're crazy or anything, but just because of what they're going through, waiting on their loved one to come back home each day, not knowing what's going to happen or how they're going to come back home. Board Chair Carter.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to speak to a couple of things. When I first heard the word defund, of course, my first thought was, no way. Yeah, that these people sound crazy. And so when I heard other the terminology, the breakdown of the terminology, I agree with reappropriation of funding for different things within the police department or other educational programs. But I think that Detroit does a great job with the programs that they do have. I also think that the demilitarization of departments. I don't know if you all recall a couple years ago when a suburban department rolled in with a tank to serve a warrant on somebody in the city of Detroit, did not notify Detroit Police Department, and the residents of that community were in an outrage. And I think that those, and I'm not saying those departments like that, they need to rethink their strategies. And maybe they do need to get rid of their military equipment. The only time that I've seen the equipment used here in the city of Detroit is in barricaded gunman situations. So we're not always, I haven't seen where Detroit is always is using the military equipment that they do have in negative ways. I think that when they do utilize that equipment, it's necessary. Also, I wanted to speak on the licensing. I know years ago, and some of you may not know, for 10 years, I was a training coordinator for the Sheriff's Department. And according to Mr. Blackburn, I ran one of the best police academies in the state. That's what he used to tell me, but he probably tells everybody that. But anyway, I think that licensing is so important during this time, because the license, if the license is not revoked, if there are bad actors, then an officer can go from agent, and agencies don't do the proper background, conduct the proper backgrounds of the applicants, then that officer can go from agency to agency to agency. Now, I think that we need to do a better job with licensing and being able to revoke a license regardless. And I think right now, you're only able to revoke a license if you're charged or convicted of a felony. I think that there needs to be more conversation around that, because we shouldn't allow bad actors to go from agency to agency in the state of Michigan. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to my panelists. I know, like I said, we could go on and on and on this subject for probably another 5 hours or more, but we just don't have that time. But I don't know if we have any callers that have any questions. And if we do, and to my callers that are participating on the call, and to those that are on Facebook Live, if you want to ask a question, if you press 9 that will raise your hand, and to the ones that are live on Facebook, if you just type in your question, we will try to get an answer for you. And I don't know if my panelists have an opportunity, but if you have an opportunity and we go over 10 minutes or just 10 minutes, I'm not going to ask you to give too much more of your time, because I just want to see what the callers have in mind that are participating with us. I would appreciate if you can stay. If you can't, it is nothing held against you. And I do understand that everyone does have a very busy schedule. So I just want to thank you for participating if you have to leave. We do have caller 687 on the line. Those are the last 3 digits of your number. Caller 687, you are unmuted.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Brenda in District 4. I have 3 concerns. And my one concern in listening to all of the officers in their training and recruitment, out of all of the things that the tests that are done on a new officer, I didn't hear anyone mention lie detector test. And my next concern is the 2 Santana and Bullock mentioned that the residential requirements were found unconstitutional. And my question is, unconstitutional by who? They did mention that Snyder was in office, the Republican Party, during that time. But is there a law that it was found unconstitutional? And if so, what is the name of that law?
Okay, so you asked 2 questions, and the first question was dealing with the lie detector. And I do know that you have another appointment, Mr. Lewis, that you have to leave. And so again, if you have to leave, we do understand. Don't worry about it. We will excuse you without holding it against you, because this is supposed to be 1 hour. I did see Senator Bullock with his hand up. Mr. Lewis, did you want to say anything before you have to leave?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. And if anyone has any further questions, please feel free to reach out to the Department of Civil Rights and myself. If any questions, any concerns or anything like that. I mean, we work closely, especially through our ALPAC networks, Advocates and Leaders for Police and Community Trust. So we have a vast network of law enforcement partners that we work with on a regular basis. So if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. And I just want to say thank you to all the panelists. But unfortunately, like I said, I'm kind of double booked here. I'm speaking at Western Michigan University right now, so I got to go. So thank you.
Can you give your email address right quick, please?
Yes, it's Lewis, Lewis, like Sam, A like Apple, and number 4, Lewis, A4, at michigan.gov, G-O-V.
Okay, thank you so much. And
All right, thank you.
we appreciate you so much. Thank you. Be safe out there. Does anyone else have to leave and they want to give a closing remark? Okay. Senator Bullock?
So I'm going to try to recall this. It's not a law. What it is that officers work through a union and have a collective bargaining agreement. And it's unconstitutional to force the terms of residency when you have a collective bargaining agreement as a term of employment. I might be off on a little bit of that, but that's the generality of what's unconstitutional about it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let me follow up with Senator Santana. I think she has her hand up, and then I'll come to you, Mr. Blackburn. Senator Santana.
Just to respond to a question, yeah, Marshall, you hit it right on the nail. It was the police and fire unions wanted to, not require police and fire to have that residency requirement in their bargaining agreements. But also, just so for the callers' perspective, yes, there has been legislation introduced by Detroit lawmakers for many years to change that residency requirement. So that has been something that's been introduced throughout the legislative time frame, but unfortunately has not received any traction here in the legislature.
Thank you. And that was from our 2 senators, Darnell, Blackburn.
Just really quickly on the since we set the standards for hiring, with regard to a lie detector, those are very costly. They're not admissible in the court proceedings. And also, even though we're talking about employment, the idea is that agencies do their due diligence. We've actually just beefed up the requirements for background investigations for police agencies. So the lie detector test doesn't necessarily fit the mode of hiring. So that's why they don't do lie detector tests.
Okay.
Well,
All right. Thank you. Did anyone else want to comment on that? Okay. And I still see 687 hand raised. 687, you are unmuted. 687 are the last 3 digits.
Oh, yes. Madam President, I have another concern. Ricky Smiley of the Ricky Smiley radio show has been marketing and pushing the use of automobile cameras for our citizens because of the behavior of the police officers around the country. And I just wanted to get the thoughts on the panel on how would that work with the police's behavior if I have a camera in my car and I'm recording everything that happens at the stop.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone want to respond to that? I don't see anyone who wants to touch that question. And so I don't think we're going to get a great response to that one, but okay, Mr. Blackburn, I see your hand up.
I'm trying not to monopolize everything, but since nobody else is talking, I mean, that actually already occurs. Every citizen in the United States has a cell phone, and as soon as an interaction occurs with police, the first thing they do is they bring that cell phone up. Fortunately and unfortunately, that's why we were able to determine what happened to Mr. Floyd. So I think that's kind of already occurring where people are walking around with their cell phones and they're automatically recording incidents. So just to kind of respond.
And let me also say that I was fortunate enough as my tenure during as I'm on city council, I was fortunate enough to have the Michigan Supreme Court have a hearing at Cass Technical High School, and all of the justices was there. And one of the case that we actually talked about was a case with the use of the cell phone and whether or not the evidence that was on the cell phone was actually admissible in court. And it truly was a good case. It was something that happened in the city of Detroit in Wayne County. It was a good case and the evidence was admissible in court. And so it was all of the justices that was down at Cass Tech. It was the first time they had been in the city of Detroit to hold a community, to actually hold a community hearing. And it was awesome. The high school students, we also had some junior high school students, had an opportunity to just sit there and watch what actually happens when the Michigan Supreme Court is actually holding their case. And it was really good. We had both attorneys, the prosecuting side as well as the defense attorney, there to argue their case. And it was an awesome experience for our students to see. So that was really great for the city of Detroit. And I look forward to having something like that happen again in the city of Detroit. And we had basically all of our justices that sit on the benches here, they're at Cass Tech participating in on that. particular hearing, and it was awesome. So thank you for that response. I don't see any more hands up, and I don't think we have any questions on Facebook, and it is 5 after 3. And I do understand that every single person on this call has a very busy schedule. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank all of you all for joining us today. I think it was an awesome panel. I think it was an awesome conversation that we had. It is a topic that was definitely needed to be had. I want to thank also, one of the things that I've seen is our younger people getting more involved in protest and what is actually going on. And then I said to someone, I said, unfortunately, someone lost their life to see a change take place in what is actually happening in the United States of America today. Unfortunately, someone had to lose their life. This, what we're saying happening, did not just start happening. Things like this has been happening a long time, but people are sick and tired of being tired, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, and they're stepping up to the plate now, showing just how tired they are. And so I do think there's going to be some changes. I commend each and every one of you for the job that you do each day. People just don't know until they walk in the shoes that you all are walking in and that we walk in. And when many people have to walk in those shoes, they shake their head and say, I don't see how they do what they do. And that goes to every last person that is sitting here on this panel today. I commend each and every one of you. We may not always agree on everything, but it's one thing I can tell you. I can tell you, you all do a doggone good job at the job that you are doing. And I truly appreciate you, and I appreciate you all taking the time again out of your busy schedule to be with us today as we discuss this. I'm going to end this call. Thank everyone who joined us as a participant to just hear what's going on. Thank everyone who are live on Facebook, visiting us from the council's table. Please follow me on social media or visit my city website at www.detroitmi.gov/Brenda Jones to be added to my email distribution list. Also, if you thought this was a good session today, have someone check it out on Facebook, on my social media, because we are finding that if they missed it, they go back to it and they're telling their friends about it. And we're getting a lot of good hits on Facebook on some of the panels that we are having today. Again, thank you all so very much. I want everyone to stay safe. Don't forget, wear your mask. Keep yourself safe. Keep someone else safe. Keep your family safe. Put that mask on your face if you're out in the streets, even as to stay at home order is being relaxed. Still, keep that mask on your face, because they're saying that the second wave is going to be worse than the first wave. And I hope that is not true. I am not in the medical field, but I am praying that that is not true. Everyone, for now, stay safe. Have a wonderful Wednesday. Again, thank you all for being here with us this day for this well-needed conversation. Thank you all again for the job that you do. And I truly want to thank the Chief of Police for the city of Detroit. I want to thank our Sheriff, Benny Napoleon. I want to thank everybody's boss for allowing you all, our senators. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Our Chief of Police, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And then I definitely have to thank our interpreters who are here interpreting. And they're doing a great job. They always do a great job. And truly, last but not least, thank you, Team Jones, for the job that you do. I appreciate everyone. Stay safe. God bless the city of Detroit. God bless the state of Michigan. God bless the county of Wayne. God bless all of our counties, and definitely God bless the United States of America. Until we meet again, stay safe and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. And thank you for
Thank
what you
you.
do.
Thank you.
This will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good talking to all of you.